See, there's something within us that wants to leave a legacy. But here's the thing you need to know is if God asks you to do something, don't look at the size of the job, look at the size of your God who asked you to do it. See, he laid down his life for you, so that tells me that you are not worthless, you are worthy. And this is what he wants to rewrite into your story. That reality impacts everything.
Hey, Lakeland Small Groups, thanks for tuning in again this week. We're going to recap this past week of Heroes, and we were talking about the other group. So this past weekend, we get to the end of the book of Hebrews, and we see this kind of quick left turn, and at first glance, it seems a little weird. So the whole first chapter of Hebrews 11 is these amazing men and women who did these amazing things, and God did miracles and rescued and delivered. And at the very end, in verse 35, we get to this other group, and it says this: others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, they were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and in holes in the ground. And when I read this, I'm like, oh, this other group doesn't really feel like the first 34 verses. These people who saw God work miracles and provide and power and show the world who he is. This group is tortured and sawed in two and suffer greatly. And then verse 39 says this: but they were all commended for their faith. Just like the first 3 quarters of the chapter, this second group is also commended for the faith. And so, in your small groups, here's where we want you guys to go this week, kind of coming off the message this weekend, is the fact that God could choose to deliver anyone in any circumstance, or he could choose to let us go through some really tough stuff. But he's in charge. And I remember reading this passage a few years ago, and I had always kind of lived with this dream, more than a dream, this feeling that God had always said, I have great plans for you. I want to use you to do great things. And I believe that all Christians should feel that way. We read in Ephesians that God prepared good works in advance that we should do. And so I remember just kind of struggling through ministry and wondering, God, when is this promise going to happen? When is this dream going to be fulfilled? And then I read these verses at the end of Hebrews 11, and I realized, oh, I guess if God's really God, he could put me in either group. He could do exactly what I've always hoped and dreamed, or he might have plans that don't quite make sense to me, but he has good plans to come from them. So talk about in your groups, what does it look like for God to be totally in charge no matter what? Here's the big line from this weekend. We need to realize that God doesn't owe me, God owns me. God doesn't owe me this fruition of a dream, this story that I've always thought would come to be. He can do that if he chooses, but he might have plans to use my story and my life in other ways. And it's not that God owes me, it's that God owns me. What would your life look like if you shifted your mind to pray that prayer to God and to say, I am all yours, my life is yours, I'm going to have faith in you regardless of if you deliver or if you don't. And here's these people commended for their faith, even though instead of being successful heroes, they're suffering heroes. The chapter ends, and the very beginning of the next chapter in Hebrews 12 talks about this. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Scorning its shame, he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, Jesus, who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. The idea is Jesus went through some really hard things, but God had great plans to come from it. And he says we should fix our eyes on Jesus so that we won't grow weary, because we will go through many things. The last verse I want to share, and we looked at this weekend, is in James chapter 1. And it says this: consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. he says that we will face trials as we follow God, but we should actually consider it joy. And he says, why? Because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. God will let us go through some things, and he might sweep in at the last minute and do a miracle, or he might let us be tortured for a while. That's a weird and horrible thought, but I'm actually glad that God included this other group at the end of Hebrews chapter 11. As great as it is, and it encourages our faith to read those successful heroes, sometimes it almost makes me think that if I have enough faith, if I do enough good, that God will show up in this miraculous way. And then the author of Hebrews tacks on this other groups and says, actually, there's a lot of people who had faith, were commended for their faith, but they didn't see this happy ending, at least not in this life. But it says that they believed and held out for a reward, a resurrection that was better. If we live that way and trust God to use our story and our life to however he wants to, our witness will be that we held out. Our witness, like these other group of heroes at the end of Hebrews 11, will be that we had faith in our God no matter what. And that is a powerful story. This little weird other group at the end of the chapter kind of catches me by surprise, but at the end it encourages me and challenges my faith, maybe more than all the heroes before them. So as you guys talk in your groups tonight, I hope that you just have some time of reflection about yourself and sharing with each other that will really challenge your faith to say, God doesn't owe me, he owns me. And however he wants to use my story in my life, I am all in that he would receive the most glory from my faith. God bless you guys as you talk. We'll see you guys again next week.